Hi, greetings. It's me, Dr. Paul Gerhardt, and this is video number 7 of my public speaking series. And this particular presentation is on language habits. And I've been doing public speaking for around 20 years now, and there are a lot of subtle lessons that I've learned over the years, and hopefully you can benefit from my experience and you find this video helpful. So some of the things that we're going to talk about is the importance of language habits. We're going to talk about language and being able to critically think, things to think about, understanding the very nature of communication. Very often we don't consider meaning and abstractness. We have to be very careful about classifying concepts. We need to really help people understand the meaning with specificity and accuracy in our language. And that means we have to understand basic principles and rules. And so hopefully I'll share with you some helpful rules to help you be able to effectively create a speech that you're really proud of, that gets the job done. It really moves people to taking specific action, motivates people to see things differently and do things differently. And so in this, we think about vividness, figures of speech, political correctness, the language, how we say things really matters. We could be pushing people away if we're using sexist language or verbal obscenity, for example. Even overstating ideas really matters. So let's get right into this presentation and talk about the importance of language itself. The greater the size of your vocabulary, let's face it, the easier it is to communicate and understand. You have to have a large repertoire of words that you understand in order for you to be able to adjust your message to meet the understanding of your listeners. So just know that 500 of the most commonly used English words show more than 14,000 different dictionary uses. So it is easy for people to perceive a concept or a word much differently than the way that you intended. And we're all different, and that really is key in giving your presentation. Is it's the very nature of perception that makes your message either good or not so good. So we need to really be clear on our nonverbals that are accompanying the words that we're using. Our body language is one of the most powerful things that we have in order to be able to convey a message. So we have to be able to make sure that we're very thoughtful in how we use our body language. There are codes and signals that affect one another. We use a thing called congruence, and that's when things go together as they're expected to go. And then sometimes when you use incongruence, there's conflict with an idea, and where the listener could be confused or frustrated, or it could even make things funny in the end if you use it right. And so it really is important to understand what your intent is, who your audience is, and then use the right words to help move people to see things differently and do things, take action about whatever that is. So we have to understand the origin of people's language and recognize that there are things called spoonerisms, which are slips of the tongue that could push people away. So bottom line is, language truly is a holistic system, and when you understand the rules of it, then you have better tools to be able to help you become a better public speaker, right? So think about how powerful language truly is. Wars are ongoing because people have said the wrong thing to the wrong people, or people have gotten really irritated with another person because you've said something the wrong way. So language really is powerful in moving people to see things and do things. And if you're going to be a public speaker, or in whether or not it be a large meeting or a small meeting or just one-on-one, you really have to understand how language works. So do some critical thinking. Some basic terms that I want to share with you to help you understand some of the dynamics of language are referent, the thing for which that word represents. So when I refer to candy bar, you know that it's going to be a piece of chocolate, right? Or concrete language. This is the closest language possible to the word that's representing. Cup means a cup that we drink out of, or a cup is a measurement. Abstract language, that is the furthest from what's being referred to. Denotation is the literal meaning. What does it denote? Connotation, that's added meanings. Oh, when you say this, you really mean this. Abstracting, this is a process of thinking in which we selectively leave out details about concrete or real things. Perception has at least two elements, sensation and then interpretation. So you really have to remember how will people perceive things, and then make sure you choose the right words. Inference is something that we do. We're drawing conclusions based on possibilities beyond what was observed, and this really deals with probability rather than certainty. So here's an example. You say the word chair. People in their minds will have a reference that they go to. They're thinking about what a chair is, and then they'll interpret a specific chair. Sometimes chair could have another meaning if you think about it. You know, when I said chair just now, I meant the kind of chair that you sit on. But maybe some of you thought about a chairperson of a meeting, for instance, or a particular group or a department. So words are really powerful, and you have to think about the abstract step ladder used. For instance, you might have in your mind a specific airplane, but if you say flying machines, people may think hot air balloon, helicopters, or jet planes. If you say airplanes, then people are getting a little more specific picture in their mind, and that could be a jetliner, a fighter plane, you know, a single-engine Cessna, whatever. And then you could maybe in their mind it's a little bit closer to what you were thinking, and people are thinking of fighter planes, you know, maybe from a particular war. Or you could specifically say a World War I Jenny, and then in their minds, if they knew what that was, they would have a very clear idea of what you were thinking about when you were creating your message. So really being able to classify concepts and things takes some skill. Remember, there are over 500 commonly used English words that have more than 14,000 different definitions, right? So this is why people get frustrated in the workplace, or why arguments happen at home or in the workplace. So it's important to use a limited number of words to represent an infinite number of things so that you can have rational communication. No word has real meaning except in a particular context in which it's used. We have to consider syntax. That's the arrangements of the words into the context of the sentence. So how you use a specific word helps people understand the meaning. For instance, let's go back to chair. I could say the word chair, and then in your mind you'll think, oh yeah, I got a chair at my house, in my office. Or if you say, I need to go talk to the chair about getting permission to do something, then most likely, unless someone doesn't understand your definition of chair, they would think, why would he talk to a thing that you sit on? But chair could, in that context, go, oh yeah, someone who is in charge of a department. You know, so that's how language can be really confusing. People must have a frame of reference. A very famous person said, I sense a rat. And then listeners of that person would go, a rat? Does he mean a sneaky person? And someone would go, oh, he suspects treachery. No, I think he means that there's like a rodent or something that's rotting underneath his desk. I think he knows who the betrayer is. You know, so lots of different things can come to your mind when you use a specific word. So context truly matters. And so we need to be very specific and accurate in our language. The jargon that we use is a specialized language that's accepted and used in a specific context and industry. And every industry has their own words that they use. And so we use jargon. I have never been in the military, but I've worked with a lot of people in the military, and they like to use acronyms and jargon that has to be explained to me very often. So use the right, accurate word in order to make sure that you're helping people understand your message, which is the goal. So specificity really does matter. Some general principles and rules are don't overgeneralize. That's about making a statement with a conclusion that doesn't have enough evidence to support it. It's not usually intended. We do indexing to disaggregate groups into individual members. Sometimes we have either or responses, and this is a generalization. Not everything is either or. False to fact, this is the use of language with statements that cannot be supported by facts. And we see this, unfortunately, in politics too often. So when you are qualifying a statement, you are adding a comment to help indicate what truly is being said. And so that helps clarify meaning. Some things are a lot easier, like 55, it means 55. So meaning management really is important. Some helpful rules to consider is the index rule. It's about being aware of stereotypes and other forms of generalization. The is problem is related to a principle of non-identity. Language and thought that isn't identical. Words that are not clearly signified. Dictionaries can help when they have meaning to the people that are assigned. So sometimes if you have no context, it makes things a lot harder. There's something called the etc. rule, and this is related to none-allness, or an awareness that something is always going to be left out. So we have to be aware of how much information we're giving and how much time we have to give our presentation. So some other helpful rules is making sure you're aware of the language that you're using. Some words we don't use so much anymore, and so be aware that who your audience member is may not understand the words that you're using. Then there's non-communication going across. You're just simply talking. So take a look at pre-symbolic language. It's a language that has no recognizable speech. Be aware of idioms. These are an accepted expression shared by a culture or a group of people with a specific different literal meaning. Top dog, for instance. So we all have sayings that we grew up with that we think really have a common meaning, but to other people outside of our own culture, that makes things a little more challenging. So we must really look beyond words to obtain real meanings that are intended. We are always naturally doing this. Imagery is really important, and this a form of imagery that employs figures of speech to produce mental pictures in your mind's eye, the mind eye of the listeners, really is important. How are you using words to help them really understand what you're saying so that they are recollecting these things through their senses? Figures of speech are really important to understand. Are you using language that's outside of the literal language that people can understand? Like metaphors sometimes can be confusing. And a metaphor is an implied comparison that transports the listener from the thing itself to the sensory image or the experience. Something called metonymy, and this is substituting the name of an item associated with a larger concept for the idea. Synecdoche is the use of a part for the whole, or the whole for a part of or parts. And then hyperbole, this is an exaggeration. We do something called a paradox, and that's another figure of speech, and this is something that seemingly that is self-contradictory or ironic or an absurd statement. Catachresis is somewhat abusive phraseology involving the use of an incompatible word. A euphemism is a mild, offensive substitute for a bad or negative connotated word. I'm not going to try to do that here. And onomatopoeia, that is, these are words that, onomatopoeia, are words that imitate the sound to which they refer. An alliteration, the use of words beginning with the same letter, alliteration. Simile is a comparison of things similar to a metaphor, and usually we make statements like or as starting out the simile. So we have to be politically correct if we really want to keep the ear of our listeners, and I highly recommend that you be aware of sexist language. Don't be careful when you say he or she when you're saying general things. You want to make sure that everybody feels respected, unless your goal is to disrespect people. I'm not a fan of sexist language. I'm not a fan of sexist anecdotes that stereotype any person, and I think when you're doing public speaking, that's one of the worst things that you can do, is fall into the category of someone who is sexist or stereotypes people. It's not right, it's in my mind. So verbal sanity is another one of those things that you really have to consider. Sometimes I use words to capture people's attention or make sure that people have are listening. So, but sometimes too, I know that I'm pushing people away. So you have to consider your audience whenever you're doing that. Don't make language overstatements. Be sensitive to who your audience is. Think about the maturity of your message, and think about the emotions behind the words of your language. So just a lot of things to consider when you're giving presentations. The greater the size of your vocabulary, the easier it is to communicate more effectively. Remember that 500 of the most commonly used words have more than 14,000 different uses. So these same term differences could be described as lexical or contextual or neurological. Think about your voice, your appearance, and the gestures that you use. Each of those will affect your message to the listener. Language truly is a holistic system. The more you understand how it works, the more effective you can be in crafting your presentations. So think about what the meanings are, what the connotations and abstract meanings are. Think about the people who are receiving your message and the symbols that you're putting in there. Sometimes words that you use might have other connotations, and so they're referent of other concepts that you didn't intend. So use generally accepted concepts with each word and symbol that you use. Consider about being literal. Consider how rigid you are or how logical you are in your language that you use. We have habits that we fall into. Try to eliminate as much jargon as possible and be very specific and accurate as it pertains to who your specific audience members are. Consider indexing the dating of your language, and then discerning pre-symbolic language, as we've talked about in here. Again, the vividness of your imagery will really help people use their senses to gain mental pictures in their own mind's eye of the message you have. Language does not stand alone. How you say things truly does matter. You have to consider the audience and consider what you can do to keep people engaged and critically thinking about your message in an intelligent way. But how you say things truly matters. It's about the words that you use, it's about how you say the words into the delivery, and then of course it's about the body language too. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I've given you a lot of information to consider about language habits. I hope that you have found this 20-minute presentation helpful, and more than anything else, I hope that you have a great day, because only you get to choose how you feel about it. I'm Dr. Paul.